Good evening, good people, and welcome to the Neil Oliver Show on GB News TV, on radio and online. The worldwide threat to freedom comes not just from the globalists of the World Economic Forum and their ilk and their puppets squatting on top of the pyramid. Those determined to rule, to take and keep control of what everyone is doing to run the world, inevitably apply the tactics and make the moves we see around us. Bad faith individuals, bad actors, do bad things. We know this, or we should by now. More insidious than the agendas being pushed down onto our heads from above are the many and varied divisions that have been sowed at the same time, divisions between we the people. We've been set at each other's throats deliberately, even more so over the last 4 years, until we are blaming each other for all the trouble. I understand why it's happening because I feel the same urge, which is to build walls against those whose opinions differ from mine. I also feel the urge to find someone to blame for all that's happening. And it's easier to blame people I can see than people I can't. But when we give in to those urges, if we all behave this way, blaming each other, excluding others when we should be welcoming them, we do the baddies' work for them. They must be laughing at us now, laughing all the way to the bank. This atomising of people, the cutting of ties that should bind, making enemies of anyone and everyone, ends in a place where no one believes a word anyone else says, where no one trusts that anyone else is acting in good faith. As Martin says in the 1931 Dracula movie, they're all crazy except me and you. Sometimes I have my doubts about you. It's a zero-sum game. I watched the coverage of the release of journalist Julian Assange. It's been reported that he and his team reached a deal with his persecutors, one that rings alarm bells for human rights organisations. He and WikiLeaks had published hundreds of thousands of classified documents that laid bare the murky goings-on of the US government. And in response, they went after him with everything they had, aided and abetted by the government of the United Kingdom. After nearly 15 years of incarceration of one sort or another, incarceration without trial, Assange is a free man. And already he is being torn down in all manner of ways, not least on account of whatever was in the fine print of the plea deal. Human rights organisations fear the consequences of any pledge not to publish classified information. They fear the consequences for the First Amendment to the US Constitution, the consequences for freedom of speech, freedom of the press. I'm no closer to the truth of it all than any other member of the public, but there's no missing the determination out there, even now, by all manner of commentators, great and small, to seek to portray Assange as a sinner, someone not to be trusted. Assange is just one man, but what has happened to him, what is still happening to him, serves as a warning of what can happen to anyone in a world where freedom is regarded not as an inalienable right of all, but as conditional, grace and favour, a temporary pass handed down by the powerful and that might be snatched away at any time, for any reason or for no reason. When governments snatched away our freedom on the pretext of what they insisted was a pandemic, a small and fragile coalition formed in opposition, questioning lockdowns, questioning mandates for masks and jabs. By now, that early unity has fractured, as elements within found it easier to shout down and tear down those notionally on their own side than to keep directing their fire towards the truly guilty. Into those cracks flowed the meddling of those guilty, exploiting the divisions and creating as many new ones as possible. Now the factions, angry and frustrated by all that's truly wrong, are entrenched in their own small camps, camps that are getting smaller by the day, lobbing grenades at one another. While it remains as true as on day one of all the malevolent nonsense of the COVID debacle, that none of the guilty are being held to account, one voice after another asking some good questions has been ripped to shreds, discredited and cast down, not by the enemy, but by their own side. There's a purity test out there that no one can pass. Any past failing, real or imagined, is deemed to be grounds for cancellation by our own side. The most unforgivable sin of all is not having been aware and vocal soon enough of having taken too long to realise what was going on. And this accusation is used to silence and censor almost at will. Among the most effective slurs applied with equal vigour by both the bad actors and those supposed to be fighting for freedom is that of controlled opposition. I looked up the term and found controlled opposition is the use of black propaganda and saboteurs who claim to oppose a particular faction but are in fact working for the faction. I've lost count of how many times I've been labelled controlled opposition. It's pretty much a daily occurrence, but it's thrown around like confetti. As a general rule, here's what happens. Someone finds an outlet for challenging some or all that's going on in this grievously and tragically altered world of ours, a world I struggle to recognise. And for some time, usually brief, they get a hearing. But as sure as eggs is eggs, someone, somewhere, eventually cries controlled opposition, and that mud sometimes sticks. For controlled opposition, you can also read shill and grifter. Always the intention is the same, which is to sow in as many minds as possible the idea that whomever is speaking, regardless of what they're actually saying, that they are either knowingly and deceitfully in the pay of big government or big pharma or the intelligence military industrial complex, or perhaps worse, unknowingly and haplessly doing the bidding of any or all of the above bad actors without even knowing it. Either way, it's a crime that ensures a conviction every time. There is no way of successfully disproving the allegation of being controlled opposition. The only option is either to sit down and shut up or carry on under the weight of having been so attacked. As I say, this relentless attrition, the self-inflicted wounds, leads to one destination and one destination only, which is the bleeding to death of any hope of concerted opposition. As well as controlled opposition, shill and grifter, those speaking out are usefully labelled from a cornucopia of damning insults. Anti-Semite, racist, Putin apologist, anti-vaxxer, granny killer, far right, conspiracy theorist, take your pick and apply liberally. Julian Assange's character has been under attack by some for years. Whomever is stoking it, the intended end point is the same: to sow distrust, to have as many people as possible question motives and intent. These tactics make lonely outcasts of us all. Another consequence has been that anyone minded to raise their voice, to stand up, must face the withering fire not just of the state and the puppets of the state, but of the very people they're seeking to stand alongside and help. It's in this way that the baddies always win. There are so many lines by which to be divided: creed, colour, class, gender, politics, nationality. The list is endless. In order to turn the tables on the forces ranged against us, we have to set aside differences, real and imagined. Remember as well that my enemy's enemy is my friend. There will come a time when the war is finally won, when there might be a point in revisiting all those things that divide us as unique individuals. But for now, those differences must be set aside. The real threat to freedom is not posed by those alongside us, by those we can see. The real threat comes from above, from that thin veneer made of the parasite class that so successfully, over and over and over again, sets ordinary people against other ordinary people, drives us to hurt one another, so the parasites can, metaphorically at least, suck our blood. Within that fragile freedom coalition, where the only unifying factor and the only one we need is awareness that we are being played by those determined to control and exploit the mass of the population in every conceivable way, within that coalition, we trip time and again over our own feet. And we do this by holding each other to an infinitely higher standard than those we should be concentrating on fighting and tearing down. A newly fledged voice, whenever it appears, is instantly scrutinised for every word and deed, present and past. That new voice might make good point after good point, ask pertinent question after pertinent question, but always the moment comes when the grievance archaeologists unearth some or other past remark or behaviour, or when the voice is heard to say just one thing out of line, and then the purity test is applied. The speaker is always judged to have failed, and the voice is silenced. And who wins? Who gains? The enemy every time. The simple fact of the matter is that it's unity we need, and a realisation that while we all have our imperfections and our past transgressions, we must allow for those, forgive those, at least until the war is won. Another simple fact is that the enemy is so much better at all of this than we are, not least because they've been at their corrupt and corrupting business for so long now. They say it takes 10,000 hours of practice and repetition to master a skill. Well, the enemy has been at it for a lot longer than that. Whatever their differences, however much they might dislike one another, along whatever lines they divide in terms of their objectives, they are utterly brilliant at sticking together to get what they want. They make mistake after mistake, get things wrong over and over, lie into our faces. But do you see them tear each other down? No. The past few years make it plain. They pushed a pandemic, they pushed products that may have been neither safe nor effective into billions of people. They provoke war and sacrifice the hundreds of thousands for the sole aim of making and laundering money. They get caught lying. They refuse, point blank refuse, to contemplate the dreadful consequences of what they did. They're exposed for all of these crimes and more besides, and are any of them ever held to account? On the contrary, the usual suspects, all the guilty parties, now have more prestigious jobs, more money, their reputations are untouched and unblemished. The politicians among them have the unmitigated gall to stand for re-election, and, which is the worst of all, they are collectively closer to their master's objectives than ever before. While we are goaded into hating one another, distrusting one another, our enemy stands shoulder to shoulder. To get where we want to be, to achieve what we want to achieve, being the protection of our freedom, we have to stop demanding of each other the condition of having been right about everything every moment. If any mistake, any failing, is always grounds for exile to outer darkness, then we all lose in the end. Here's the thing. Back in the old world, the IRA used to torment the British Army by saying, you have to be lucky every day. We only have to be lucky once. We let the state away with one mistake after another, while at the same time demanding a flawless, perfect record from each other, forcing each other to have to be lucky every day, not just to never make a mistake in the present or future, but to have made no mistakes in the past either. That won't work, because that's not possible. The state is already hard at work presenting opponents to their will as one sort of terrorist or another, when by now we should be aware of who is actually aiming to terrify us. The ones in elected office. The baddies make their own luck, and they do it by setting aside their differences, tolerating the infinite failings of which every one of them is guilty individually and collectively, and instead simply sticking together and ruthlessly backing each other up until the job's done. To have any real hope of finally turning the tables on our adversary, we must learn to do likewise, and quickly. Joining me this week for the duration of the show, friend and journalist Jasmine Birtles. Jasmine, do you know what I mean when I say I thought at the beginning that we were getting somewhere and that we were all going to stick together, and then it just fell away like sand in the face of a tide?
It does feel like it, and everything that you've been saying is elements that I've been noticing. But what I was thinking is it's what you see in families, in churches, in charities, in political parties. The worst is from the inside. When you have attacks from the outside, you can get together and, as you say, attack that, and that can put you together. But when you start to have infighting, and you find it in companies as well. I remember working with one company, a big one, that took no notice at all of their competitors. All they want, each department was like those awful people upstairs. There was constantly competing, with that other department, whereas they should have been putting their firepower against their competitors. And so it's not just in the freedom movement, it's not just in the movement of people who are trying to push for a new and better world. It's across the board, I think.
Where do you think it comes from? I mean, I was suggesting that the forces, ranged against us have been at whatever they're at for a long time.
Oh yes.
Is it just an experience, or is it because so many of us have blundered into the arena, and we don't have the practice? It's
human nature, I think. Honestly, and in a sense, the kind of people who are standing up and seeing what they're awake, they're seeing what's going wrong. quite often we're more aware of wrong things, and when we'll point them out, we're quite sort of difficult people in many cases. That's why we're able to stand, you know. But people who are compliant, who will go along with this, that and the other, they're the ones who don't understand why we're standing, why we're so annoyed, why we're so angry and upset.
And the controlled opposition thing.
Yes. Yeah.
That's, I mean, and I've seen it, it's not just me, I've seen it applied to
everyone.
Everybody else.
Yes.
Oh no, don't
Yes.
listen to them. That's
Controlled opposition.
That's a Mossad asset.
Yes.
That's a CIA operative. That's a come
yes.
on.
GB News are constantly described as that. Absolutely. Tucker Carlson, whoever you like. Certainly Russell Brand. All the time I'm hearing him, and as you say, it's strewn around like confetti. It's very difficult to speak against, but it's very difficult to prove as well. So it's one of those things that just sort of hangs in the air and does nobody any good, other than, as you say, the forces that we're trying to fight.
Indeed. First break of the evening.